Okay, hi everyone. My name is Megan Peterson and I am the primary prevention advocate with Peace River Center Victim Services. So, if you don't know, February is Teen Dating Violence Awareness Month, and so we wanted to provide a couple of educational webinars to talk about how teens can have healthy relationships. And tonight we're going to talk about how you as educators can help in that. Okay, so let's get started. So, first, let's talk about what is teen dating violence. So, to understand teen dating violence, we need to understand domestic violence. So, of course, when you think of domestic violence, physical abuse comes to mind. And while this is a key factor, it's not the entire story. So, physical abuse is fairly straightforward and something that most of us have a pretty firm understanding of, but of course, it's any slapping, punching, hitting, pushing, shoving in a romantic relationship or in any relationship because that's just unacceptable. But it can also be emotional abuse. So, emotional abuse is a control tactic. It uses emotions to criticize, embarrass, shame, blame, and otherwise manipulate the victim. It's a consistent pattern of abuse and bullying words that undermine the victim's self esteem and mental health, and it can warp the victim's sense of reality. So, that's a lot of information. So, there's a few things we want to go a little deeper on. First, let's talk about some of these emotions. So, criticizing, embarrassing, shaming, and blaming, these are not normal things in a relationship. So, a lot of criticism about what you wear, how you present yourself, how you speak, how you hang out, or who you hang out with. That's a form of abuse. Purposefully embarrassing someone, whether alone or with others, is a form of abuse. And of course, shaming someone and blaming them for all of your own actions and all of the consequences in a relationship is also a form of abuse. Um, and of course, it can undermine the survivor's sense of self esteem and their mental health, which creates a more vulnerable person who is less likely to leave an abusive situation. Okay. There's also sexual abuse. Now, this could be extreme forms of abuse, such as rape, but this could also look like coercion, not respecting boundaries, blackmailing the survivor with sexually explicit images or other content, and making sex purposely painful or engaging in really anything that makes the victim uncomfortable. And then, of course, there's financial abuse. So, this is another control method. And it could look like someone not allowing their partner to work. It could look like someone being very critical of their purchases or forcing you to justify all of your purchases. But it's not normal to not have equal financial access in a relationship. And this, of course, creates a level of dependency that isn't healthy and that makes it a lot more difficult for a survivor to leave. So, financial abuse is not quite as prevalent in a teen dating violence situation because, of course, they're probably not going to have a joint bank account, but it's still an important factor of domestic violence. So, one thing we always want to make sure to reiterate is anyone can be a victim of DV, and it is not your fault or a reflection of your character. Abuse is a choice on the abuser's side. Okay, so let's look at some more types of abuse. So, control, physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse and intimidation, isolation, verbal abuse, coercion, threats, and blame, using male privilege, and economic abuse. So, we've touched on a lot of these already, but another red flag would be isolation. So, in a relationship, you should still have your own friendships, your own other outside familial relationships, coworkers. There should be lots of people in your life that you have time to pour into that relationship. You go do things with those people. It's not normal for you to feel isolated and as if that one person is your only connection to the world. And I also want to mention using male privilege. So, of course, anyone can be a victim of domestic violence, regardless of gender, sexual orientation, race, ethnicity, or any other factor. But about 95% of survivors are women, and largely abusers do use their male privilege to continue cycles of abuse. So, whether that looks like rigid gender roles being enforced by society, or that looks like being let off easy by law enforcement, or it looks like using stereotypes of women overreacting. All of those things can contribute to a culture of abuse that allows this kind of behavior to go on. So we've talked about what domestic violence is. So what is teen dating violence? When there's domestic violence within a romantic partnership, we call it intimate partner violence. And when teens experience intimate partner violence, we call this teen dating violence. So let's look at some statistics because it can be hard to wrap your head around just how common this is. So these are from the CDC. 1 in 11 female and 1 in 14 male teens report experiencing physical dating violence within the last year. So that means that if you're in a classroom and you've got 11 young women and 14 young men, then one to two of these students is going to have been physically abused in the last year by a romantic partner. That's a pretty big number, especially when you think about how many kids are in your classroom, how many kids are in your school, how many kids are in Polk County, how many kids are in America. So 1 in 8 female and 1 in 26 male teens report experiencing sexual violence in the last year. High school and college age women are among the most vulnerable for sexual violence demographics. So this is something that we do want to raise awareness about and make sure that there's a firm support system for. And now 26% of female and 15% of male adult survivors say that their first abusive experience happened before the age of 18. And that's really why we're here today. It's so important to build healthy relationships young because those patterns that start in high school extend into adulthood. Now, before we move on, I just have an additional note that there are no current statistics on the experiences of students outside the gender binary. We do know that with sexual or gender minority identities, they're in greater danger of every kind of violence. So while we don't have the statistics, we can only assume they're even higher than the numbers that we do have for female and male teens. So teen dating violence is a pattern of abusive behavior, and it's meant to gain power and control over a current or former partner. We really want to focus in on this being a pattern. So it's going to be consistent abuse. And what's so dangerous about that is it's literally going to start to warp the survivor's sense of reality. And I mean, it's going to start to change their perception of what's true, their perception of how trustworthy they are, their perception of how they should be treated and what's normal. And that's really dangerous, and it makes it very difficult to leave a situation when you don't even trust yourself to recognize the signs. So let's get into how we can prevent teen dating violence as educators. So as educators, you're among the first line of defense in preventing teen dating violence. That's why this webinar is so important. So we kind of are going to outline 3 steps tonight. So awareness, teaching healthy relationships, and becoming a safe adult. So let's get into awareness. As educators, knowledge is power, and teaching our students about difficult topics like teen dating violence is the best way to protect them. Often students do not know what abusive behavior is, and so they cannot identify it. So we've kind of outlined 3 ways that you can increase awareness among your students. So the first is to incorporate it into your lessons. So obviously teachers are busy, school schedules are packed, but one thing you can do is just in each lesson, try to find a way to bring this conversation up to gauge where your students are, what their understanding of relationships is, how they think their own relationships are going, and build a space that's where it's safe to talk about these things. So I have a couple examples, but say you're in literature class and you're reading a Shakespeare play. Have your students identify some of the interpersonal relationships between the characters and parse out whether that's healthy or unhealthy. You know, if the main character in the person's romantic interest, you know, in their relationship, are they trusting one another? Do they have honesty and good communication? Does it seem equitable? These can all start to help students understand what is positive and negative romantic representation. Another example would be in history class. You know, we talk a lot about dictators and some really awful things that have happened in history. Well, dictators we know have very low self-esteem and narcissism. This is a good time to talk about how those traits affect what they did with their power, but also how it affected their personal relationships. Another example is in art class. We talk about a lot of geniuses in art class, but we could also start conversations about how just because someone's a genius, it doesn't make their problematic behavior acceptable. And so when we talk about very complex people like Vincent van Gogh and Leonardo da Vinci, we can talk about what they did in their personal life and how our relating to their art changes because of that. And it'll help plant those seeds of students realizing what they should and shouldn't expect in a relationship, and that they shouldn't let things go just because they love someone or someone's really great at something. So another thing we recommend is to bring in professionals. So this is where Peace River Center comes in. So I can provide education to students or staff or both, and this can look all sorts of ways. It can look like me coming to the classroom and providing a presentation, speaking at an assembly, offering webinars like this, going to a staff meeting. And so please don't hesitate to reach out. And then provide resources. So as educators, you want to make sure you're prepared. Do you know the Peace River Center Victim Services number? Do you know the National Domestic Violence Hotline? Do you know what safety planning is, and could you assist a student? Do you know the signs of an abusive relationship among your students? Are you prepared to have a conversation about it? Okay. So let's move to teaching healthy relationships. So we want to ensure students understand what behavior is abusive, but we also want to ensure they understand what healthy relationships look like. So not just focusing on the negative. And some of the things you can do is modeling it. So of course you want to maintain a level of professionalism, and so you're not going to constantly be talking about your personal life. So your romantic relationships probably will not be modeled to your students very often, but the way you talk about other adults, the way you interact with other staff, the way you interact with the principal or guidance counselors, this can all indicate to students how adults should be treating one another. Teaching directly. So like we've already talked about, it can be good to incorporate these things into your lessons, but it could also be good to be more straightforward and to just talk to your teens about what a healthy relationship and what an unhealthy relationship looks like, and how widespread an issue like teen dating violence is. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about becoming a safe adult. So a safe adult is the person in a student's life they will come to when experiencing abuse or other adverse situations. So we teach teens that a safe adult is somebody who is non-judgmental and who's going to be available within the next week. So for a teen or a child, this could be their soccer coach, their teacher, their guidance counselor, their principal. It's just going to be someone they can trust. So we're going to talk a little bit about how you can become someone your student will trust. So the first thing is being non-judgmental. It may surprise you the things that your students are doing out of class, but you have to maintain a stance of non-judgment, and you can't let it affect how you perceive them or how you react in the moment, because obviously creating a safe space is the most important thing. Be perceptive. So is your student suddenly very withdrawn? Is there a huge change in behavior? Do they know too much about sex for their age? Have they lost a lot of weight recently? Are they having angry outbursts? These are all signs that they are experiencing some form of abuse, whether it be from another student or a family member. But you want to be able to catch those signs. So a safe adult has trustworthy judgment. Obviously, a huge fear that teens have when coming forward is that an adult is just going to escalate the situation, that they're going to tell on them, that they're going to get adults that they don't want involved. And so you do have to do a very careful job of walking that line between not breaking their trust but not endangering them. So you want to be prepared to gauge their level of danger. Is their life in danger? Is their long-term well-being in serious and imminent danger? If so, call DCF. If you're unsure about the level of danger your student is experiencing, we are a great resource for that. So you can call Peace River Victim Services, you can explain the situation anonymously, and we can give you advice on whether we think it's time to report it to DCF or other next steps you could take. And so just remember, help is available. So let's talk a little bit about knowing the signs. So a safe adult is perceptive, and educators are going to be among the first to notice these big changes in behavior that students experience. So we've talked about a few of these, but a drastic change in appearance. So this could go a number of ways. A young student could suddenly dress very flashy, very provocative, or a young student could suddenly wear very oversized clothes and try to not draw attention to themselves. Both of these are signs of abuse. Unexplainable physical injuries. So if your student ever comes into class hurt, it's a good idea to ask them what happened. It shows that you care, of course, but it can also ensure that there wasn't anything abusive that caused it. So if your student laughs a lot during their explanation or their story doesn't add up, this could be cause to investigate a little bit further. A drastic change in personality. So if you've had a very well-behaved student, but all of a sudden they're having angry outbursts, we would encourage you, rather than discipline them, ask them more questions. Of course, it can be hard to have a student disrupting class, but this is a very big sign of abuse. Outbursts or inappropriate knowledge. So again, if your student seems to know way more about sex than they should for their age, this could mean that they are experiencing abuse and that they're getting their knowledge from a very unhealthy place. And so it could be a good sign to intervene. Now let's talk about some signs of aggressors. It's hard to think about that a student may be an aggressor, but abuse is often learned behavior. And so it's good to notice these signs young and try to give them aid to break these cycles. So extreme jealousy and controlling behaviors. If your students are in a romantic relationship and you notice that one of the students always talks for the other, one of the students has a lot of opinions about what their partner wears, how they talk, who they hang out with, if you notice that they're sort of forcing them to change who they are, this could be a sign of abuse. Relationships that escalate quickly. If they just start dating, they're already saying that they love each other, they're already inseparable, you already hear that they're spending all their time together, this can be cause for concern. Mood swings and anger and aggression. So this is a symptom that may not be directed directly towards the partner, but it may just be a general way that they interact with other students and staff. Isolates the survivor. So do you notice that they're not allowing their partner to have other friends? Believes in rigid gender roles. So if somebody's ever very, very outspoken about a woman's place, says things that, they think girls should be submissive, this is definitely cause for concern and definitely a time when you want to start a conversation about equality and treating everyone with respect. So if they're verbally violent, if they overreact a lot, if they use very victimizing language, or if they don't take responsibility for their actions. So this doesn't just have to be in the relationship, but it would normally extend to that as well. But if they get in trouble in school and they're just not willing to take accountability, or they are very harsh and they won't admit that, this can be cause for concern. So let's talk a little bit about intervening. So we may come across situations that require us to intervene in what we believe to be an abusive situation, or a student may come to you and request help. Either way, there's a few things to consider. Number one is, are you equipped for the conversation? Are you prepared to remain non-judgmental? Are you prepared to make a phone call to DCF? Are you prepared to alert the parents? Can you help them make a safety plan? And also, you want to think, how is your relationship with this student? Are you a safe adult to them? Do you know of a staff member that is closer to them that you trust? This is especially important when you're the one initiating the conversation, because the student didn't necessarily choose to talk to you about it. So it's just as likely that it would be good to ask another staff member to do that. So what should the conversation look like? We've got 9 steps here that we want to go over. So the first thing is the conversation should be one-on-one. Your instinct might be to pull a guidance counselor in, or a principal or a parent, but you never know who the abuser is, and a student's going to be less likely to speak up if they don't trust every adult, especially if it's someone they know is a mandated reporter. The conversation should be calm and not preachy. So you want to do a lot of listening, and you can give advice when they ask for it, and you can certainly make them aware of your fears for them, but you don't want to be telling them what to do. Always remain non-judgmental, and remember, they're the experts of their own story. So let them gauge if they are afraid, if they are being abused. Let them gauge how fearful they are, how serious the situation is. And of course, they're kids and you're adults, so there are certain things that you know better, but they're the ones living it. So you want to be respectful of that. Now, you have to be honest about your responsibility. Let them know that you are a mandated reporter, what that means, and in what cases you would need to bring someone like DCF in. You don't want to break their trust afterwards by reporting without being upfront with them. Express your concerns for the survivor, but focus on behaviors rather than blanket levels of abuse. So a student might not be ready to say that their boyfriend is abusive or their girlfriend is abusive, but a student might be okay with you saying, oh, it's not, I don't think it's healthy that he tells you what to wear, or I don't think it's healthy that she texts you that often. We always want to affirm the survivor. So if they say, oh, this freaks me out, or this makes me uncomfortable, or I'm actually okay with this, or he does care about me, you can be affirming about all of those statements. So provide resources and offer consistent support. So this might not be a one-time conversation. This might involve you checking in over weeks or months. Survivors make contact with somebody about abuse an average of 7 times before actually ending the relationship. That means this could be 7 conversations. Okay, and then evaluating the danger level. So is their life in danger? Are their parents part of the abuse? Do you feel that they are capable of handling the situation with aid, or an authority figure needs to fully step in? And of course, if you need outside advice about any of those things, you can call Peace River Center Victim Services. So let's talk about what PRC does. So we offer emergency shelter, 24-hour hotlines, an assessment of children, referrals, and counseling. We also offer safety planning, community education, which is what we're doing tonight, support groups, professional training, courthouse advocacy. And we offer some more services, but one thing I really want to talk about is safety planning. So with students, this is going to look different because they're probably not cohabitating with the person they're experiencing abuse from, if it's teen dating violence. So this could look like a student coming to you and letting you know that they would like to end a relationship because it's not healthy, or you've together determined that it is abusive, but they're scared to do it. So there's a couple considerations. First of all, the parents are going to need to be notified, but you don't know that the abuser's parents will agree with you. So you want to make sure that this is done in a safe and controlled way. You also want to see, what classes do they have together? Can we change their schedules so that they're not interacting? You want to think about ensuring that they don't need to break up in person. A lot of times there's a pressure to do these kinds of things face to face, but you want to reiterate to your students that they don't owe their abuser anything. The most important thing is to be safe. And with a person like this, you don't want to deliver bad news when you're actually with them. And so sending a text, do they need to change their phone number? Do they need to block them on social media? And you want to help your students to think through all of these things ahead of time. Okay, and then these are our major programs as PRC. If you have any questions about these, we would be happy to answer them. And these are our phone numbers. So you can take a picture of the screen, or anytime if you just Google Peace River Center Victim Services, you'll be able to find these numbers. And we serve Polk, Hardy, and Highlands counties. Thank you so much for coming. Again, my name is Megan Peterson, and I would be happy to provide any more education or resources, so feel free to reach out.